source of power for all of us, and truly is one of my favorite places.
In-depth, unedited interviews with state leaders. That's hard to find these days, but that's exactly what we bring you each week from the TVW studios. Tune in on TV, online, or on podcast for TVW's Inside Olympia.
You know, if you ask the average citizen in Washington State about our defense industry and where our locations are, they'll tell you about McChord, or they might mention Fort Lewis or one of the major bases around the state, but hardly anybody knows about Jim Creek. And here we are high in the Cascade Mountains, where one of our most important facilities is located. Started in the 1940s and been upgraded many times since then. This is where we communicate to our military all over the world through an antenna and radio system that's still used today. It's the major communication effort that our military has, and it's located right here in Northwest Washington. The Navy not only protects us, but it's also protected some of the biggest trees in our state. The stump behind me is just one example of something that was logged before the Navy got here. But high in these hills, they've also protected some of our finest old-growth forests. This is Jim Creek, and it is one of my favorite places. This is the Grays Harbor National Wildlife Refuge. These incredible tide flats host just a wide variety of birds as they migrate up and down the west coast in the spring and the fall. If you haven't seen these migratory birds, come to Grays Harbor and see this location. This refuge, this resting spot for migratory birds, is one incredible place to watch. You not only see the shorebirds, the sandpipers and the plovers and a wide variety of other shorebirds, but in the sky you see eagles and harriers and hawks and falcons. Boy, if you're a bird lover or ever just wanted to do it for one day, this is the place to visit. This is one of my favorite places in the state of Washington.
Looks like it's going to be an exciting week and a half as our colleagues on the other side of the aisle try to push through a record amount of taxes in a very short period of time. We're going to stay focused on our priorities, same priorities we've had for the entire session. On public safety, I think a couple things to mention. House Bill 2015 passed out of the Senate yesterday. This is the bill that would provide about $100 million for additional law enforcement officers, not exactly in the form we would like it, but improved in the Senate, and one that I think that will ultimately help rebuild our law enforcement across the state. So we're moderately pleased with that. I like it in different form, but happy it's moving forward. On the flip side, a bill that I had that would have helped manage the overcrowding in Green Hill and reduce and improve safety for both staff and residents died yesterday at the hands of House Democratic leadership, who insisted it had to go with a bad bill, 5296, that would have represented a real threat to public safety across our state by allowing dangerous juveniles back on the streets unsupervised. And we know that policy is bad. We know we've even had recent homicides as a result. So of the two, I'm pleased that they're able. I'd rather see both of them die than 5296 move on, frankly. But it is kind of going to be tough for Green Hill to manage their situation, and that's all at the hands of the House Democratic leadership. On affordability, we got a lot of things, not any good things, but a lot of things going on. We got a couple bills passed the Senate recently, a fluoride bill or hydrocarbon bill that would require a significant more cost to grocers and other food manufacturers, going to drive up the cost of food in our state. Got a low carbon fuel standard that passed on a party line vote that's going to drive up the cost of fuel by as much as 40 cents by 2030. And then the big one is we had 7, I think, tax bills. It's still, I'm having trouble keeping up. Tax bills dropped and read in yesterday, heard in a late night session in Ways and Means, literally in the dark of night by the time we got done, with very little opportunity for the public to weigh in on bills that are going to affect them directly. Sales tax increase, B&O increase, property tax increase, not exactly the progressive taxes that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle have promised. These are all very regressive taxes that are going to hurt every Washingtonian in their pocketbook. It's really a shock, both the types of taxes, the quantity taxes, and their lack of willingness to give it time for the public to weigh in. Truly shocking. And then finally on K-12, it does appear that we're going to still have some investment in public education in the proposed, the new proposed budgets from the House and the Senate Democrats, but well short of where they originally proposed. I think pretty much in line with what was proposed by Senator Chris Gildon, who is also here with us today. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Chris Corey to give a welcome from the House.
All right, thank you, Senator Braun. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to, I don't even know what, we got 10 days left. So what are we at, day 95 of this legislative session? I think all of Washington is eagerly awaiting sine die. Just to build on some of the comments that Senator Braun made, number of bills passed and didn't pass through yesterday's cutoff. I think a couple I'd like to highlight. Again, I agree with Senator Braun on that JR bill, that bad one from that came over. We were able to stop that over here. They had a lot of problems with that bill, and I think would have definitely decreased public safety. It was something we heard from a lot of people in our districts and from the Seattle area with concerns on that bill. A narrowly passed EPR bill, the Extended Producer Responsibility Bill, this novel idea that will have minimal increase to recycling rates in Washington, but will have nominal increases to prices consumers are paying up and down where they spend their money. That was narrowly passed, still alive. Hopefully, more to come on that one. Yesterday there was, we can report a Senate bill about limiting more weapons in certain places didn't move on, as well as a bill that would have allowed non-citizens to become law enforcement officers. That stopped as well. A couple of good bills we were able to get off the floor yesterday. A good Senator Binky bill that helped with election and security. That's something that's been important to our caucus, is making sure our elections are fair and secure. So that was a good one as well. Again, some movement on special education funding. We've got a lot more to go, but we're moving the needle, and we're pushing for that as well. So I am going to stop there and open it up for questions.
Terrific. We will go with Jerry Cornfield from the Washington State Standard. Go ahead, Jerry.
Good morning. Thanks for taking my questions. The first one for Senator Braun. Last night, on the issue of the prepayment of sales tax, one of the provisions in one of the bills, I wonder if you could share your reaction to the answer you received about its policy objective and what it may reveal to you about where things stand in the budget process.
Well, unfortunately, Jerry, I didn't really get an answer. I asked staff. Of course, staff didn't know, and it wasn't laid out in the intent section. So they suggested the sponsor answer, and she kind of danced around it and did, said it was just in case they needed the flexibility. Flexibility for what? I have no idea. I think it's actually just a crude mechanism to make up for the fact that they don't. The budget they've put together doesn't balance in fiscal year 27. That's my best guess, but I don't know. It's a move never been done in our state before. Unprecedented, seems pretty risky if they prepay a year's worth of sales tax and then it doesn't work out that way, especially with what we're seeing. And I should have mentioned this in my earlier comments. All of us should be worried. We have the revenue collection that came in earlier this week, about $70 million below forecast, which, it's only one data point, so it's not a trend yet, but that may be an indication of where it's headed, and certainly a bunch of new taxes is a bad idea. And of course, collecting taxes in advance that you might have to pay back, some of them, is an even worse idea.
Yeah, I would just add, it seems like, once again, we're kicking the can down the road. And this is especially true because we're going to take some money from one month and then we're going to be short that in the next fiscal year. So when will it ever stop? Obviously, if you're resorting to a budget gimmick like that, I think you need to take a step back and look at your priorities and readjust.
Jerry, did you have a follow-up?
I did. I didn't know if Senator Gildon wanted to respond as well on the tax question because he was there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I concur. We didn't really get a good answer. The best guess that we have is that they had trouble making one fiscal year balance, so they just pulled revenue from, the following year and making people pay early. Another thing that I thought was interesting was their B&O tax proposal, where they proposed to increase the B&O tax on large businesses, where they actually have a sunset in 2030. So the question that comes to my mind immediately on that is, if you are relying on about $3 billion-ish of B&O tax from these large companies to balance your budget, how are you going to get rid of that in just a few years and still be able to balance your budget? It seems risky. It seems it's problematic at best.
Thank you. Second question, Senator Fortunato put out a press release today that states that ICE has detainers on more than 300 people in state prisons. It's an issue he said he raised with the governor's office. I wondered if that subject came up Tuesday, Senator Braun, when you met with the governor, and if not, if this is now an issue that you want to see some action on, your caucuses want to see action in the final 10 days before you leave.
This is not an issue I've discussed with the governor. It is starting, as more information becomes known, it is something we're concerned about. We were told by the head of Department of Corrections they were cooperating with ICE, and that they only had a few folks detained that might require cooperation with ICE, and now it looks like quite a few more, hundreds more than were suggested. So we'd like to get to the bottom of it and find out how we're managing it. I mean, if it's true that there are 300 folks who are being held by Department of Corrections, that's seems appropriate that we cooperate with ICE, and not only that, it's this huge cost to the state to maintain those services for that number of people.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, we will go to Carlene Johnson from the Center Square. Go ahead, Carlene.
Jerry asked one of my questions that I was going to ask about the prepayment for sales tax, which that concept is bizarre. But I do want to ask, maybe from you, Senator Braun, what are you hearing from the governor on where he might come down? We've got so many additional tax proposals out there. And we know, they pulled out the wealth tax, that got away from rainy day. Is he tipping his hand on where he will be on any of these other tax proposals?
Yeah, he's really not telling us anything privately that he's not saying publicly. He's been very strong in opposition to the wealth tax, which, by the way, if you didn't notice that, the Senate Democrats have added that to the agenda for tomorrow's exec, which is a little bit surprising. And he's been very cautious on solving this problem with new taxes. He's been reluctant to say, pick this tax or that tax. I think he, to a certain extent, is willing to defer to the legislative majorities, but it's not clear to me at all that he's comfortable with the level of taxation that they have proposed. And I want to just go back to that. It's $12 billion in state taxes. I think it's over $15 billion, almost $16 billion in total taxes, because there's a bunch of local taxes wrapped up in those bills as well. So I can't say where the governor will come down eventually. I've heard a rumor that he may have something out today, but that wasn't from him. It was secondhand. We'll see what happens.
Arlene, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, there were some changes made to 1163 permit to purchase on Monday. Anything there that you were happy about or just pleased about? And, it looks like this thing will get through. Just any of you could weigh in on that.
A couple changes that help on the margins, nothing significant. Still a very bad bill that is very plainly unconstitutional. I mean, if you look at the Brune decision, it very clearly no historical precedent for this type of legislation. We have similar legislation in Hawaii and California that's either been struck down or is enjoined while it goes through litigation. So I don't know why they're going down this path I suspect just to suck up legal resources for the next couple of years and folks who are committed to defending Second Amendment rights.
Okay. Next, we will go to Jacqueline Jimenez Romero from the Washington State Standard. Go ahead, Jacqueline.
Hi, so I have a question around the healthcare proviso for undocumented immigrants and non-citizens. This has been a proviso that has been introduced in the past and is looking to continue to be funded in this session. So I'm just curious on your caucus's stance on that. Advocates say that it would help reduce emergency costs, and so was wondering if you could address your position on that as well.
Well, I'm not sure I know exactly the proviso you were referring to, but we have had some concerns about, especially in a time when we have significant budgetary challenges, that we continue to spend hundreds of billions of dollars providing services to individuals who are not in our country or state legally. I think that while we should have compassion, but we should also make sure we follow the rule of law. And so I can't answer exactly on the proviso because I'm not familiar with that one in particular, but I think it's kind of a mixed bag. We have a real problem in our state and in our country because of the legal activities that the Biden administration prevented or allowed over the last 4 years. It's going to take us a while to recover from that. I think we're on a better track, but it's going to take a while, and I think we should be very careful with how we expend state resources in a time when we just don't have that many state resources.
Yeah, I think on the House Republican side, we've expressed a lot of concern across the budget, but this is a great example of it, of how we are diverting money, removing programs or cutting things that actually help Washingtonians at the expense, at the expense of them for other people, right? I think the big one we can talk about that happened either this week or last week, the days are starting to run together a little bit, was how we're now going back on some of our work we had made to make sure that we weren't taking Social Security and other payments away from families that were on assistance programs. And we are doing that to save money, and yet we're turning around and then, passing it out in this manner. We have to have our priorities straight. I think making sure we help the most vulnerable in Washington is one of them, but we have to do it in a manner that protects people that are citizens and legal residents first, especially when you're talking about dramatic cuts in other areas, one of which is cuts to healthcare for the most vulnerable. And I think that it's kind of, I think it's a juxtaposition of messages, right? We're saying on the one hand, we can't help Washingtonian residents, but we're going to make sure we help those that have entered our country illegally. Senator Braun's right. This is a very complex issue. Obviously, a lot of this is put on Washington. It's not something necessarily we chose to be a part of, but you know, we've got to make sure we're not being an enabler in this process as well.
Jacqueline, did you have a follow-up?
No, that was it. Thank you.
Okay, great. Next, I'm going to go to Jacob Moore from the Chronicle. Jacob, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I actually don't have a question at this time. Thank you, though.
No problem. Thanks for joining us anyway. So I will go to Laurel Demkovich. Laurel, go ahead.
Hi, good morning. I wanted to ask a housing related question. I know that rent stabilization has kind of taken up a lot of the air this session, but there are a couple of supply related bills that are still moving, like transit oriented development, parking, lot splitting. I'm sure there's others. Just wondering how you guys are feeling at this point about any housing supply bills, if that's if there's anything that you are supporting or are sad is not making it through at this point.
Yeah, I think you hit the key ones. Lot splitting, I think it's now passed both chambers. And I think there's a concurrence required in the House. Hopefully that will go okay. It's that the Senate has been the challenge on that bill for the last 3 years, so I was pleased that we got it through. The transit-oriented development, really a disappointing bill. There were some other versions of that bill that might have done something useful. As it currently stands, it's somewhere between does nothing and might even do a little bit of harm in preventing development based on the affordable housing requirements. So that's not where we had hoped it to be, and many of us opposed it for that reason. The parking bill, I actually not sure where that stands. I know we passed out of the Senate. I think it made it through the House, but I don't know where it stands off the top of my head.
Yeah, do you want to take that for us?
Sure. The parking bill did make it out of the House. It was somewhat of a mixed vote. There are some concerns that there would be not enough parking, especially I think it was a half a unit per multifamily building per unit. Just worried that a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work in every city in Washington state. There was also some commercial parking restrictions that Eastern Washington particularly had some angst with, so that one did come out. Again, we were happy to see the lot splitting one come out. We'll find out about concurrence on that one. Representative Barkis's bill, very good. And then the TOD bill, I'm not sure, Senator Braun, if they left. At least we had a multifamily or kind of a tax exemption that I was able to put on in the Housing Committee, which is why I supported it out of the Housing Committee, but not off of the House floor with the affordability piece in it. But that was added, and I'm not sure if it stayed in or not at this point in time until it comes back for concurrence.
I think it did stay in, but it's about where it's okay, not great. And I would sum it all up like this: is the proposition, at least from the Senate Majority Leader at the beginning of the session, was that they were gonna pass rent control and they're gonna pass a suite of pro-development bills. The three we just described, in my view, don't come close to describing a suite of pro-development bills. They are bills that help on the margin. The best one there is the lot splitting bill, and that's going to take a while before that has a real impact. So we didn't just change our future in development with the bills that are in front of us so far this year. So with that in mind, I think it would be best for the rent control bill to be put down for the session, because we certainly didn't do anything that's going to come close to offsetting it in terms of development and building of new residential housing.
Yeah, I would say overall, as it stands today, if you look at the entire slate of bills around housing, we are in a net negative. We are going in the wrong direction. I think if Senator Braun, if I agree with him, if we put down the rent control bill, I think you could move that to a net positive. But what we're doing is a mix of setting us in the wrong direction and then trying to use marginal things to cover up for just fundamental problems we have in development in this state that is really going to take much more than, some of the middle housing and other things. We're going to have to really look at the Growth Management Act and what we're doing to disincentivize and slow down development in the state.
And by the way, you don't have to take our word for it that we're slowing down development. You can go look at building starts in the last two reports from the state economist and see that it's not, we're not making this up. The folks are building less because we're making it less attractive to build in Washington.
Laurel, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, on the same topic, I know that in the past couple of years, folks from your caucuses have really made a push for some rural housing supply bills, and it seems like at this point, I'm pretty sure none of those are moving through. I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about kind of now that you're at, another year where some of those are falling flat, how you're feeling and what, you think might need to change to get some of those across next year.
So this is more speaking for myself than necessarily the caucus, but very frustrated. We have had continual opposition from advocacy groups in Seattle who are focused on not allowing us to develop in rural Washington. They have a misguided view that the best way to protect Washington State is to keep rural Washington rural. And while that's an admirable goal, and I certainly don't want to see my community turn into a Seattle or Tacoma for any number of reasons, the inability for us to be able to develop our land to get housing up and down the spectrum, whether it's single family or multifamily, whether it's for renters or for first-time home purchasers, is really frustrating. We've had a number of proposals, myself included, have introduced proposals to try to utilize some of the same tax exemptions and tax deferral systems that the Puget Sound has benefited from out here, but we're continually met with opposition. And while it's admirable that you want to keep our rural way of life, we still need a place to live. We are still a huge driver for this state's economy, both in terms of dollars, but also in terms of keeping people fed and other materials that we provide out here. So if you can sense I'm a bit frustrated, it's because I am. I think that myself, and I'll let April speak for herself, but those of us on the east side of the mountain are tired of being told what we can and can't do by people in the Puget Sound area who don't understand our way of life.
Yeah, Laurel, I am committed to try to continue to work with House Democrats who have not been very friendly about making any changes to the Growth Management Act and our urban growth boundaries. Just a big struggle when I had a bill the last 2 years, and I'm hoping that I'll get some help with this next year with Majority Party, which would allow development right outside of the urban growth boundaries, especially if the state has already and cities have invested in infrastructure, and meaning, water, sewer, electricity that's running down the opposite side of the street where the growth management boundaries are for the urban growth boundaries. That has been, stalled each year in the House Housing Committee last year and the Local Government Committee this year. But when you look at the being stalled on that, if I wanted to, across the street where there's urban services, I could develop a house, but it would be on between 5 and 20 acres where we could take that land and actually put housing in it when we're in such a housing shortage. And it's really hard when we have advocacy groups out there continually fighting against us, especially also look at the rural ADU bill. Advocacy groups keep putting poison pills into that bill. So we have homeowners that live in rural areas that would love to be able to put a detached ADU on their property. And for the last few years, Representative Lowe has been trying to get a bill through that would allow them to do that. And we're not taking out active farm ground. It would have to be permitted for septic and to be able to go onto the well that the homeowners have there or have another one. And so we're not talking about taking out farm ground, but yet that still continues to be the fight by putting this small 1,200 square foot ADU that we're going to deplete water systems in Washington State, and we're going to have drainage or runoff issues where that didn't seem to be an issue when we talked about bills like middle housing, when we're putting, covering up complete areas of property in Western Washington. So it's really frustrating for those of us in Eastern Washington who are trying to create more housing, and it keeps being shut down.
Okay, thank you. And next we will go to Albert James. Albert, go ahead.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm wondering if Senator Braun and Senator Gildon could talk about the mixed reaction to, or mixed vote rather, on House Bill 2015 from your caucus, and then for Representative Connors and Corey, how it may be taken up coming back to the House with some changes.
Sure. The 2015 is the House version of the bill that would add around $100 million to law enforcement. We have some concerns with that bill. It allows for spending that money on things other than law enforcement, co-responders. And the other big concern with that bill is it allows for a councilmatic increase in sales tax. So we made some changes in the Senate. One was to try to give a little more flexibility and allow locals to decide how they want to spend that money, with the belief being that at least in our districts, we believe that money would be spent for law enforcement, and that's what our focus is. And if folks in other parts of the state decide to spend it differently, that's really up to them. And I think there's some of us that got comfortable with that. And then on the councilmatic vote for sales tax, we added a sunset to that gave us some comfort with. That's about what's allows them to add a 0.1% in sales tax for the next 3 years. It also prevents folks who've gone to the ballot and failed from doing it for another year, giving them time to communicate with voters and make sure that they understand the concerns the voters had and they don't just run over the top of them. So I think that there's some of us, I think there's broad support for the idea in our caucus. Some members of our caucus were stuck on both the ways the money could be spent, but probably more importantly, the councilmatic tax vote, and decided to vote against. And then some of us voted for to keep the bill alive. I don't think it's perfect by any means, but I do think that it's a step in the right direction if we're going to solve this problem we have with insufficient numbers of law enforcement officers in our communities across the state of Washington.
And I guess, Albert, if I can just add on to that, one thing that's kind of missing from the conversation is that we don't have to raise taxes to provide this $100 million to hire additional law enforcement officers. If you recall back, Senate Republicans had something called the Save Washington budget. We've now introduced it as a standalone budget. And inside of that budget, it fully funds not only state government and all of the services associated with that, and not only does it do it without raising any taxes whatsoever, but it also provides $100 million to hire law enforcement officers. So the need to raise taxes is just not there. Senate Bill 5810 certainly proves that point.
And if I'm correct, I don't, unless it changed, Senator Braun, didn't the bill that come over, it was 25 million, not the 100 million that we originally talked about?
The bill that came from the House was reduced. That's going to be determined by the budget. We are, but essentially want to keep the bill in play to give reinforce the governor's push for $100 million in the budget. So you're right. We are not where we want to be on this bill just yet. And I share the concerns expressed by Senator Gildon and the folks in the House who voted against the bill. It's not an ideal situation, but we have to keep pushing for more law enforcement officers in our state, one way or the other.
Yeah, I think there are serious concerns. Well, obviously, we agree with the notion of funding police officers, but you keep adding strings and caveats, and you make it more difficult for a lot of communities to be able to implement that idea. My opinion is our budget is about priorities. I think this should be a priority. We should universally be embarrassed by our crime statistics as well as our law enforcement officers per capita. And we just, again, another tax, tax your way out of it. No, we've got money for this. Frankly, it's something we should prioritize and put an apology on it for some of the bad police bills we've put out of this out of Olympia in the last few years. This should be hey, sorry, we really messed up and we put you in some bad spots, so here's some money to help get us back on the right track, instead of saying, well, if you want it, you can tax yourself to do it. I think it's, again, just indicative of the mentality here in Olympia right now.
Great. And next we will go to Mitchell Rowland with the spokesman. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Good morning. Nothing for me today.
Okay. Thanks for joining us. And let's try Simone Carter with McClatchy.
Morning. So earlier this week, I know that there was a little bit of tension in the House about a change in debate rules. Aside from that, I was hoping that each caucus could talk generally about how the session has been in terms of working with Democratic colleagues compared with previous sessions. Have Republicans felt more shut out than normal, or has this been on par with past sessions?
So I'll address the first part, and I think April would probably take over, well, both the first and second part. Yeah, we had a rule change at the beginning of this year that was in the House a pretty big deal, because that rule had been in place for over 100 years. That basically required a 2/3 vote to call the question or end debate on any given amendment or bill. And we warned the Democrats when they proposed this rule change at the beginning of the year that it was a bad move, that it was irresponsible and offensive to us as House Republicans and the millions of Washingtonians that we represent. And we encouraged them not to use it. And we were very clear, if you used it, there would be consequences. And so in the FAFO portion of this debate, we found out on Monday or Tuesday, whatever day that was. It was completely unnecessary. And my colleagues and I pivoted very quickly to show that we were not going to be silenced. I think to the specific point of when it was shut off, I think that was even more egregious, right? We were debating removing an emergency clause from a bill that was going to gut the parental rights initiative that we had just passed into law from the voters, or from people that signed the initiative a year prior. And an emergency clause was put on that bill to prevent a referendum. It's not an actual emergency. The courts have upheld that the law was legal and could stand. So there was no emergency for it. And my caucus, rightly so, felt that this was an inappropriate use of an emergency clause and something that we should fight for, and that is constitutionally protected for the people in this state to offer a referendum on bills that they may or may not agree with. And obviously, if it's not an emergency, it shouldn't be in there. And so to shut down debate at that point was incredibly tone deaf, in my opinion. And we responded in kind. And I think that the message was made loud and clear, and we're going to continue to press to return that rule to the way it was, so that the minority party, whether it's a Republican or Democrat, can have their voices heard and be part of that process.
And I thanks for talking earlier this week, Simone, with me on that. But I do think it should be indicative of the fact that we were shut down in a super important debate. But last night we finished by 5 o'clock without our traditional 5 o'clock cutoff bill that we would have been there until late. So obviously the majority party was able to finish all of their business in a timely manner. We were out of there yesterday without a 5 o'clock bill. I don't personally believe there was a reason for them to shut off our debate. And again, as we discussed in the interview I had with you, 132 years leadership on both sides of the aisle, whether the Democrats or Republicans have been in charge, have been able to manage the floor with that rule in place. And so I think that's an important thing to note. Also, you asked a question about how we felt the rest of the session has gone. I sit in House Appropriations, assistant ranking member with Representative Couture. And once again, the House Republicans have been cut out of important negotiations in the House operating budget, which is our big giant budget for the state of Washington. And when we're in this much of a dire situation, when we're trying to figure out how we're going to manage not raising taxes on residents of Washington and working on our budget, it would probably be good if you had the voices of about 3 million Washingtonians at the table, which the Democrats have not allowed this session. So continue to be very frustrated with that portion.
Yeah, in the Senate, I think we haven't had quite the level of animosity I perceive in the House between the two caucuses. It's been pretty civil and professional. But I would tell you, it is growing more difficult. The majority does seem somewhat indifferent to the concerns from the minority, and we've had a little more tension on the floor of the Senate in recent days. I think the biggest frustration I would second what Representative Connors say is we're, I think, 14 days since the majorities went into conference on the budget with no idea what's going on. Neither the minorities nor the public have any idea what they're talking about, and they're going to roll out a budget and pass it off the floor after sitting for 24 hours. We already know there are substantial changes in what they must be doing based on what they've released on revenue, but we have no idea what it might look like, and that's pretty frustrating.
I think what Senator Braun said is very important. You know, this budget blackout that we're experiencing. Typically, whenever they go to conference, you know, they're making small changes between the House and the Senate, and it's appropriate to get the work done. But, you know, it's not like they're just changing the tire on the budget. This is a complete overhaul. They're changing the engine, they're changing the transmission. This is a complete overhaul of the budget that's being done behind closed doors and without input from the people of Washington State. And I really find it interesting that just a couple of weeks ago, we had a supposed budget shortfall in the amount of about $21 billion. Now, all of a sudden, $9 billion of that emergency has fallen by the wayside, and it's down to $12 billion. And I'll remind you that whenever this first started, the shortfall was $4 billion, and nonpartisan staff all along has said it was about $6.5 billion. That after the latest revenue forecast, that jumped up to about $7.5 billion. So whenever they say what this emergency is and how much the deficit is, I have trouble believing them at this point because nonpartisan staff has been very clear about what it is, and their numbers continue to change. Every time you blink, there's a new number out there.
Great, thank you. And next we will go to John Stang.
I don't have any questions.
All right, well, thank you for joining us. And that wraps everything up for today. So with that, we will say thank you, and we will see you next week.